Virgin giant Viking was 40 and alone until an obese widow knocked on his house door. "Torvid the Silent," they whispered in the mead hall, their voices thick with fear and mockery. 40 years old and still no wife. Even the gods have cursed him. In the frozen valleys of gray stone, children were told not to wander near the dark forest where the giant lived. Men remembered the berserker who once tore through battle lines like a storm unleashed. Until his fury left even his own shield brothers trembling, he had not raised a blade in 15 winters. Instead, Torvid built his cabin deep in the pines and locked his silence behind thick wooden walls. On a night when the wind howled like wolves and snow clung heavy to the earth, a sound broke his solitude, a knock, urgent and desperate, rattling the heavy door. Torvid's hand froze on the hilt of his axe. No one came here, no one dared. When he opened the door, he found her. Astrid, broad-shouldered and full-bodied, cheeks flushed from cold and fear. Her cloak was torn, her breath ragged, and behind her hounds barked in the distance. "I beg you," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "They are hunting me. Gunnar Eriksson claims me as his by law, but I will not go. I would rather die in the snow." Torvid stared at her, this widow with fire in her eyes. His life had been silence, shame, and solitude. Yet here she was, bringing danger to his threshold, and something else he could not yet name. The hounds drew closer. Astrid raised her chin, waiting for rejection. Instead, Torvid stepped aside, his voice rough as stones grinding together. "Then you will not die tonight. Come in." And with that, the giant's long exile began to crack. Astrid had once known laughter. In her youth, she was the daughter of a shipwright, strong-armed from hauling timber, with a body fuller than the delicate maidens men sang about. Suitors mocked her, calling her broad as the ox cart, until Eric, a fisherman with a silver tongue, asked for her hand. She thought herself blessed, until marriage revealed his true self. He was cruel when he drank, and he drank often. Bruises had become her hidden companions, her silence the price she paid to survive. The night he died was one she had never spoken of aloud. Eric, goaded by his younger brother Gunnar, had flown into a rage. He raised a knife, his eyes wild, his words venomous. In desperation, Astrid had seized the warhammer hanging by the hearth, a relic of her father's, and struck once. The blow ended his life. The elders ruled it an accident, and Gunnar helped weave the tale. But he never let Astrid forget. For years, Gunnar's shadow lingered. He whispered that she was a murderess, that he alone kept her secret. By Norse custom, the brother of a dead man could claim the widow. Gunnar waited, biding his time, until the harvest past winter. Then he declared before the thing that Astrid was his by right. She refused, and so he loosed his hounds. That was how she had come to Torvid's cabin, snow in her hair, desperation in her eyes. Torvid, too, bore scars, though his were etched deeper than flesh. Once he had stood at the front lines of the king's raiding party, his berserker rage so fierce that foes and friends alike feared him. He remembered the day it ended, a burning village, a child staring at him with terror as though he were no man, but a beast. He dropped his axe, unable to bear what he had become. Since then he had lived alone, feared more than he was known. Inside the cabin, silence stretched between them. Astrid, unused to kindness, busied herself with the hearth, coaxing flame from damp wood. Torvid watched her move, her size no hindrance, but a mark of her endurance. She carried herself with the strength of one who had survived blows, whispers, and shame. At last she spoke. Gunnar will not stop. He will call me a murderess to the world, twist the truth as he always has. I have no sons left at home to shield me, only him and the gods. Torvid's jaw tightened. You are not his to claim, and you are not alone now. His words, few and heavy, carried more than promises. For the first time since her husband's death, Astrid felt the cold weight of fear ease, if only slightly. She had come to a man the world called a monster, and found someone who saw her not as prey, but as a person worth sheltering. The snow deepened outside, the hounds drew near, and in that small cabin, two exiles, one from men, one from herself, began to glimpse the fragile thread of hope. The night did not allow them rest. Torvid heard the baying of hounds echoing through the pines, closer with each gust of wind. Astrid's breath came sharp as she peered into the dark. She had run as far as she could before reaching his door, but Gunnar's men would not give up so easily. Torvid stoked the fire until it glowed hot, then banked it low. We cannot stay. They will find the tracks in snow. Astrid's hand trembled on the cloak at her shoulders. I have nowhere else to go. His gaze softened just a flicker. Then you go where I go. They stepped into the night together, leaving behind the warmth of the cabin. The snow crunched beneath their boots, moonlight spilling silver over the drifts. Torvid carried an axe across his back and a torch in his hand. Astrid, though heavy of frame, matched his pace, determination carving lines into her face. Every breath was a cloud, every step a vow to keep moving. The path wound upward into the mountains, through trees bent low with ice. Twice Astrid stumbled, and twice Torvid steadied her with a hand so large it engulfed hers. He said little, but his presence was anchor and shield both. At a ridge they paused, listening. The hounds had lost the scent at the river crossing, where Torvid had carried Astrid on his shoulders, his great boots leaving prints that disappeared in shallow water. For the first time, silence held. They found shelter in a hunter's lean-to, a rough shack of pine branches. Inside, Torvid lit a small fire. Astrid's body ached, her legs raw from the climb, yet she set to work as if by instinct. She tore strips of cloth to dry near the flame, brewed a rough broth from the dried meat Torvid carried, and hummed a low tune to steady her hands. Torvid watched her, his face shadowed by firelight. The song was one he remembered from long ago, a lullaby sung by mothers to sons before battle. He had not heard it since boyhood. Your voice, he said quietly, startling her. It carries strength. She gave a rueful laugh. Most say it carries too loudly. Let them say what they will. The forest listens. The words, plain and unadorned, made Astrid's chest tighten. She realized then that this man, feared and mocked, did not see her as others did. Her size, her scars, none drew scorn from him. Instead, he listened as though every breath of hers had weight. When the broth was ready, Torvid pushed the bowl toward her. You first. No, she said softly. We share. Their hands brushed as the bowl passed between them. For Torvid, the touch was lightning. He had not known the warmth of human closeness in years. For Astrid, it was an anchor, proof she was not walking this path alone. The storm raged outside, snow sweeping across the mountains. Inside the lean-to, firelight flickered across scarred hands and weary faces. Words were few, yet trust was born in silence. Astrid pulled her cloak tighter, settling onto the pine branches that served as bedding. "I fear what comes tomorrow," she whispered. Torvid laid his axe beside him, within reach. "Fear tomorrow when it comes. Tonight, you rest. No one will touch you while I breathe." Her eyes glistened in the glow. For years she had been hounded, threatened, silenced. Now, in a frozen wilderness with a man the world called a beast, she felt something she had long thought lost: safety. Outside, wolves howled, and the hounds of Gunnar hunted still. But within that fragile shelter of pine and firelight, two souls scarred by violence found the first fragile threads of trust, and perhaps something even stronger. When the storm finally eased, Torvid led Astrid farther into the mountains, past ridges where only the hardiest pines clung to stone. His cabin appeared at last, crouched against a cliff face, half buried in snow. Smoke no longer curled from the chimney. It had been cold and lifeless for too long. Astrid paused, staring at the structure. Its roof sagged under years of neglect. Shutters rattled in the wind, and a door hung crooked on its hinges. Yet her eyes softened. "A house can be mended," she murmured. "It only needs hands willing to care for it." Torvid glanced at her, puzzled. To him, the cabin had been only shelter, a place to eat and sleep before silence swallowed the hours. He had never thought of it as a home. The first days were hard. Astrid rose each morning with the light, despite the ache in her body from the journey. She swept out years of dust, patched cracks with moss and clay, and scrubbed the soot-black hearth until it glowed red again. Torvid, unused to another's presence, watched in silence, then wordlessly joined in, hauling logs for repair, setting beams upright with his immense strength. One afternoon, while he split wood, Astrid appeared at his side. "Show me," she said simply. "You?" His brow furrowed. "It takes strength." She lifted the axe with both hands, planted her stance wide, and struck. The log cracked in two. Breathless, she grinned through her exertion. "I've carried heavier burdens." Torvid's lips curved almost imperceptibly, something close to a smile. He took the axe, split 3 logs in quick succession, then handed it back. "Your turn." Thus began their rhythm. She insisted on learning, and he taught without complaint. She grew calluses, learned to balance her weight, to wield tools once denied her. He grew accustomed to the sound of her laughter, a sound that startled birds from trees and unsettled the silence in ways that no longer felt unwelcome. Inside, evenings became their truest hours. Astrid cooked with whatever they had: dried venison, root vegetables, wild herbs she coaxed from beneath the snow. She sang softly while stirring pots, filling the cabin with warmth beyond the fire. Torvid would listen, hands idle, feeling something shift in the marrow of his bones. One night, when she set stew before him, he pushed the bowl back gently. "You eat first." She frowned. "We share, as before." His gaze held hers, steady and solemn. "You work hard. You deserve it." The words were clumsy, but they struck her deeper than any compliment she had ever been given. She bowed her head, tasting tears she refused to shed. For the first time in years, someone placed her worth above their own. Slowly, the cabin changed shape. Astrid hung quilts she had sewn from scraps she carried. She laid herbs on shelves, their scents, sage, juniper, thyme, masking the must of old timber. She stitched new garments for Torvid, altering them with practiced hands until they fit his vast frame. When he first donned a tunic she made, he stood straighter, as though wrapped not only in cloth, but in dignity. Nights grew longer. Winter clawed at the walls. but within, firelight bathed them in its glow. They spoke in fragments of her children sent away for safety, of his battles, names whispered like ghosts. She never pressed when silence fell heavy, and he never judged the tremor in her voice when memories returned. There were small moments that stitched them together, tighter than words. The morning she cut her hand on a splinter, and he, with surprising gentleness, bound it with strips of linen. The evening when his nightmares woke him, and she laid her hand on his arm until the rage faded. The day she taught him to laugh again, coaxing it out with a story of her clumsy youth. Each act was simple, but together they wove a truth. Two broken lives could form a whole. Spring thawed the edges of the valley. Snow melted into streams, feeding the earth. Astrid planted seeds in small furrows outside the cabin, onions, cabbage, hardy barley. Torvid watched her with something close to awe. This woman, mocked and hunted, had walked into his solitude and filled it with color, sound, and the promise of harvest. One evening, as dusk painted the mountains gold, Astrid sat by the hearth, mending one of his old furs. She looked up and caught his eyes lingering on her. "What is it?" she asked. Torvid hesitated, words heavy on his tongue. Then he said, low, "For 15 winters I was alone. I thought it was safer that way, but now I wonder if the gods sent you to prove me wrong." Her hand stilled on the fur. The fire crackled between them, and in the silence that followed, both knew their bond was no longer built on shelter or necessity. It was becoming something far more enduring. The thaw of spring brought more than blossoms and green shoots. It carried men up the mountain path, and with them, old shadows. Word spread that Astrid had sought refuge with Torvid. In the mead hall of Greystone, Gunnar Eriksson seized the chance to poison ears. He painted her as a murderess, claiming his brother's blood still stained her hands. With equal venom, he spat Torvid's name, reminding villagers of the giant's berserker rage, insisting the two outcasts had joined in wickedness. Whispers grew, carried on smoke and ale, until suspicion once more festered like rot. Astrid learned of this when a young herder came trembling to the cabin. "My father says Gunnar is gathering men," he confessed. "He swears you'll be dragged to the thing and judged before the summer moon." Fear gnawed Astrid's resolve, but she refused to cower. One night, with the fire snapping at her heels, she told Torvid the full truth she had hidden in fragments. She spoke of Eric, her first husband, a man celebrated in public, cruel in private, his fists, his temper, his thirst. The night he cornered her, knife in hand, Gunnar's mocking laughter echoing in the hall. The blow she struck with the war hammer had not been planned. It had been survival. When Eric crumpled, lifeless, Gunnar crouched beside her, eyes glittering not with pity, but with greed. "Say nothing," he hissed, "and you will owe me." From that moment, Gunnar had bound her life in chains invisible, tightening them whenever she resisted his claim. When she finished, Astrid's eyes brimmed not with tears, but with defiance. "I would rather face the thing as guilty than live another day under his lies." Torvid listened, fists clenched. For years he had buried his own truth, but her courage unlocked his. He told her of the battle 15 winters past, the Saxon raid where his fury had overtaken him. He remembered the enemy's screams, the red haze, the way even his comrades stepped back in terror. Only one face had pierced the madness, a child no older than 7, staring at him as though he were a monster risen from legend. That gaze had driven him into exile. I swore never again, Torvid murmured, never to let rage master me. Better silence than slaughter. Astrid laid her scarred hand on his. Rage does not define you. Choice does. The next week proved her words true. Gunnar arrived with 6 men, their boots heavy with purpose. He demanded Astrid's surrender and accused Torvid of harboring a murderess. The men shifted uneasily. They respected Torvid's strength, but feared Gunnar's influence. Astrid stepped forward before Torvid could speak. Her voice rang like steel struck on an anvil. Yes, I killed Eric, but ask Gunnar why. Ask him who placed the knife in Eric's hand. Ask him why he has chained me with silence all these years. Gasps rippled. Gunnar's face darkened, but doubt flickered among his followers. Still, he would not relent. He invoked the old custom, a holmgang, a duel to settle disputes when words could not. "Fight me, Torvid," he sneered. "If you win, keep your whore. If I win, she is mine by law and by blood." Torvid's chest tightened. He had sworn never to unleash violence again. But Astrid's eyes held him steady, eyes that believed not in his rage, but in his restraint. "I will fight," Torvid answered at last, his voice carrying over the wind, "but not for law, not for pride, for truth." The men murmured, some already sensing the turning tide. Gunnar grinned, confident in his cunning. Astrid stood firm, heart pounding, knowing that whatever the duel's outcome, the moment of reckoning had arrived. And for the first time in 15 years, Torvid sharpened his axe, not as a beast of rage, but as a man ready to defend what he cherished. The duel was set at dawn, on a rocky clearing just beyond the village where snow still clung stubbornly in the shadows. Men and women gathered in a hushed ring, the air thick with expectation. The holmgang would decide Astrid's fate and Torvid's place among them. Gunnar swaggered into the circle, clad in polished mail and armed with sword and shield. His eyes glinted with malice, but beneath his bravado lay the knowledge that his lies were thinning. He needed victory not only to claim Astrid, but to silence doubt. Torvid stepped forward, towering above all, his frame wrapped in a simple tunic and furs. In his hand he carried an axe, old but sharp, its haft worn smooth by years of work rather than war. He had not stood in such a ring since the day his rage had driven him into exile. The crowd braced, some in fear, others in anticipation, as though the giant might erupt into the beast of legend. The duel began. Gunnar struck first, lunging with practiced speed, his sword scraping sparks against Torvid's axe. Blow followed blow, the ring echoing with steel. Torvid moved with grim control, parrying, forcing Gunnar back step by step. His strength was overwhelming, each swing of the axe hammering against Gunnar's shield like thunder. At last, Torvid shattered the shield and sent Gunnar sprawling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Standing over his foe, axe raised, Torvid could end it. His chest heaved, the old rage snarling at its leash. But he remembered Astrid's words. Choice, not fury, defined him. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the axe. "I will not kill you," he said, voice steady. "I fight for truth, not blood." Humiliation twisted Gunnar's face. With a cry, he pulled a dagger hidden in his boot and lunged at Torvid's back. The crowd shouted in alarm, but Astrid was quicker. With unerring aim, she hurled her own knife. It struck Gunnar's arm, deflecting the treacherous blow. The people saw it all. Torvid's mercy, Gunnar's cowardice, Astrid's courage. The tide turned. Men who had followed Gunnar now stepped away in disgust. Gunnar fell to his knees, clutching his wound, his authority broken. You'll regret this, he hissed, but no one listened. He was finished, not by Torvid's axe, but by his own dishonor. The ring erupted, not with jeers, but with murmurs of respect. For Torvid, who had proven restraint greater than rage, for Astrid, who had stood unflinching against shame and danger, and in that moment the giant and the widow, once mocked and feared, stood together, not outcasts, but victors. Spring returned to Greystone with the soft drip of melting snow and the scent of pine in the air. On a quiet morning, the villagers gathered once more, not for a duel, but for a wedding. It was no grand feast in a chieftain's hall. Instead, beneath the open sky, before the modest cabin that had once sheltered only a silent giant, Torvid and Astrid stood hand in hand. A simple arch of pine boughs bent above them, woven by Astrid's children who had returned to their mother's side. A local priest spoke the vows, but the truest words came not from ritual, but from the eyes of those gathered, eyes that had once been full of fear or scorn, now softened with respect. Astrid wore a gown of green linen, stitched by her daughter's hand, embroidered with little white flowers. Torvid, clad in a tunic she had mended for him, slid onto her finger a ring he had carved from oak, rough and plain. Yet when he whispered, "With this I give you my strength, my days, and my home," her eyes brimmed with tears. When the vows were sealed, laughter rose, children ran through the grass, and old men drank to their happiness. For the first time in many years, Torvid's deep voice joined in song, low and steady, carrying over the valley like a promise. As dusk fell, firelight glowed from the cabin's windows. Inside, Torvid and Astrid sat side by side, hands clasped, watching the flames dance. The past still lingered in scars and memories, but together they had chosen to face the future. "You are safe here," Torvid murmured. "If you will have it, this is your home now." Astrid leaned against him, tears of quiet joy slipping down her cheeks, and the question whispered itself into the night. Could this love, forged in hardship, endure not only the mountain's trials, but the world beyond? Stories like Torvid and Astrid's remind us that love often arrives when the world least expects it. It is not youth or perfection that binds hearts, but courage, honesty, and the will to stay when life is hardest. Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across oceans and generations. Where are you listening from today? Share your corner of the world below. And if you still believe that even the deepest scars can become symbols of hope, stay close. The next story is waiting for you